probably the single most important and one could even say characteristic quality of Buddha's teachings. And this is true pretty much of any of the various traditions of Buddhism that have grown up over the centuries, is compassion. Buddha himself was often referred to as the compassionate Buddha, that being kind of the overriding characteristic that he had that so immediately impressed people. But what is compassion actually? I mean, because we can mistake compassion for being pity, for example, or just feeling sad when others are sad, and they may have some elements of compassion in it. But within the Buddhist tradition, compassion actually has a very definite meaning. Anyone care to say what it is, if you know, or guess? No? Right, that's how it's expressed, may you not suffer. So to put it in the form of a wish or a yearning, it's the wish that whoever it is that we're directing our mind to, and it could be ourself, but more typically it's other beings, specific other beings or all other beings in general, may you be separated from suffering. May you be free from suffering. And it even goes beyond that. May you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And this last phrase, and the causes of suffering, is really very significant. Because, for example, to take kind of a petty example, in my own case, I've had kind of a history of headaches. And I've discovered over a period of time that certain things increase the probability of getting those headaches, such as eating chocolate, for example. Right, exactly. That's exactly my reaction. So as far as right. So as far as wanting to get rid of the suffering of the headaches is concerned, I have great compassion for myself. Right. Whenever I have a headache, or even once one starts building up, all I want to do is be free from it. Right? But wishing to be liberated or to avoid the causes of that suffering, in this particular case, is much more difficult. Because while I'm eating the chocolate, I'm not experiencing the headache, right? All I'm experiencing is the taste, which I like. But true compassion takes in not only the suffering itself, wishing to be free from the suffering itself, but from all the causes. Now, I've just used a petty example, but for example, in people's ordinary behavior, our behavior, other people's behavior, we have things happen to us which are painful. But from the Buddhist point of view of karma, the reason that we're experiencing those painful experiences is because we ourselves have in the past acted under the influence of such mental afflictions as hatred, jealousy, ignorance, and the like. So if we have true compassion, then we not only want to get rid of the fruits of those negative actions, the suffering itself, but the negative actions and the causes of those negative actions. So compassion, the wish for others to be separated from their suffering, goes quite deep. And the same thing can be said for the twin of compassion, which is loving kindness. So just as compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, loving kindness is the wish for others to have happiness and the causes of happiness. Okay. And these two, compassion on one hand and loving kindness on the other, these are the twin virtues that are at the very center of all Buddhist thought, practice, and meditation. And there is a very powerful meditative technique that is part of what's known as the tradition of mind transformation or thought transformation. The Tibetan for that lineage or that entire tradition is called Lojong. Lojong. So that's L-O, and Lo means mind, consciousness, and Jong, J-O-N-G, which apparently means training or transformation. I have to say apparently because I'm not really a student of Tibetan. Okay. I just know a few odd words. So the Lojong tradition is a tradition in which one takes on all of the ordinary experiences of one's life, especially those that are difficult, those that are challenging, those that are normally considered negative, and turns them into fuel for the spiritual path. So, for instance, if you look on the shelf of the library that deals with Lojong or thought transformation, you see titles such as transforming suffering. So taking situations which normally one wishes to avoid and actually making it part of the spiritual path. So within that tradition, within this Lojong tradition, which has its origins in the teachings of Buddha itself, but which has its particular formulation from the work of the great master Atisha. Atisha was an Indian who came to Tibet 1,000 years ago, and he founded, or his followers founded, his Tibetan followers founded a tradition which was known as the Kadampa tradition. And they included such great masters as his immediate Tibetan disciple Drom Demba, Potoa, Sharawa, Chekawa, Langri Tangpa, many extraordinary beings, the great Kadampa Geshes, they were called. And they formulated the teachings of Atisha that he himself got by traveling all the way to Indonesia, where he received the lineage of these compassion teachings from his teacher there, Serlingpa. And so this Lojong, this thought transformation, became very much the treasure, the heart jewel of the Kadampa tradition. Now, these days, there is no separately existing Kadampa tradition. All of the lineages of that tradition fed into the other existing lineages, especially that of the Gelupa tradition. Je Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelupa tradition, incorporated all of the teachings of the Kadam, and in fact, the Gelupa tradition, another name for it, is the new Kadampa tradition, since it took over the entire lineages. So, but Lojong is found in all of the Tibetan traditions, whether they be Gelupa or Kargyupa or Nyingmapa or Sakyapa, since all of them receive these lineages through Atisha and others. Okay. And I remember a story about someone who came to a Geshe living in the United States. This is Geshe Geltsen, whose center is now in Long Beach, a wonderful Lama. When the Dalai Lama comes to California, it's very often Geshe Geltsen who's the main host, the main person who's invited him. Wonderful Lama. Himself a real Kadampa Geshe in the old style. And I remember hearing a story that someone kind of came into to his meditation center and had an interview with him and said, I don't want any of this beginning stuff. I want to know the most profound teachings you have. That's what I want to receive. And without bursting into laughter, I don't know how he contained himself, but Geshe Geltsen taught him the mind training technique of Lojong, of Tonglen, of sending and receiving. And when I first heard that story, I thought, oh, well, he's kind of being nice to this guy and saying he's giving him the most profound teaching, and then giving him something that he'll find helpful. But the more I thought about it, the more it's occurred to me over the years that Geshe Geltsen was being literally true, that this is the most profound of all the teachings. Even put aside all the complex tantric visualizations and all of those things, that the transformation of the mind, of turning the mind into an instrument of loving compassion and of loving kindness and compassion, really is the most profound. And this particular meditation is considered the most powerful way of bringing about that transformation. So I've always had a great attraction for this, and so it's traditional before any such session as like the ones we're having this morning to try to cultivate as expansive and as beneficial a motivation as possible for attending and participating in such a session. Because when we come together in times like this, we could have a whole range of different motives behind it. We could, for instance, be in the habit of attending whatever it is that Seychen Ling gives. And so the person says, or the person asks you, well, why are you here this morning? You say, well, it's 10:30 or a little bit after 10:30, and it's on a Saturday morning, and that's when I always come, so that's why I'm here. In other words, the reason we're here is because of the schedule, right? Or we could think, well, maybe someone has heard news that Tonglen is the most profound of all the teachings, and we're kind of like interested in something like power or magical abilities or something like that, and so we think, oh, maybe if I attend this, I'll pick up some hints on how to control the environment or walk through walls or levitate or something like that, or at the very least, people will think of me as a meditator, kind of enhance my reputation. These are all possible motivations for attending anything, such as a Dharma session like this. But quite clearly, any of those meditations, they're either vague. I'm doing it because it's the schedule. I'm doing it because I always do it. That's kind of like sleepwalking. So that motivation is basically nothing. Or it can actually be negative, even though what we're attending is meant to be positive. If it's only focused on self-aggrandizement, my reputation, what people will think of me, then we're turning medicine into poison, in fact. So the true way to get benefit from any action is to enter into it with as positive a motivation as possible. And there are a range of positive motivations that we can cultivate. And we can start just simply by recognizing our own wish for genuine happiness. And this is something we're going to talk about when we get into the meditation itself. In other words, why have we chosen to come indoors on a morning like this rather than do any of the other activities we could be doing at home or out in the city? It's probably because we've somehow, to some extent, we've come to the conclusion that those external activities, they may be able to give us some measure of pleasure or some limited amount of happiness. But in order to experience something genuine, something deep and long-lasting, we have to turn inwards and shift around our inner priorities, the qualities of our own mind. In other words, we have to free ourselves from the causes of dissatisfaction and suffering. And externally oriented activities don't have the ability to actually accomplish that. And so we come here perhaps with the attitude of, well, there have been things going on in my life that have not been so great, but maybe if I turn inwards and get my mind together, my act together, then my life will be happier. So this would be a very positive way of using teachings like this. But it's still limited, because it's still limited to my own experience of liberation. So to expand it, we have to recognize that just as I want to be happy, satisfied, peaceful, have a sense of well-being, so too does everyone else. And so from that point of view, there's an exact equality between myself and others. And after all, I'm only one, and others are virtually limitless. Okay? And it's not just simply that my aspirations and others' aspirations are equal in that regard, but also my life and other people's lives are intimately intertwined. When we just look at our situation at the moment, sitting on a chair or a cushion, wearing warm clothing, being able to speak language, having a healthy body, all of those things we received, having eaten nourishing food earlier this morning, all of those things we received through the agency, through the cooperation of hundreds, thousands, in some cases millions of other beings. You know, how many of us sewed our own clothing, or built the furniture we're sitting on, or put the roof over our heads, or even the food that's on a fork or a spoon. All of that came to us through the combined efforts of so many other beings. So it's considered quite selfish to follow a spiritual path for my liberation, for my happiness alone. Rather, it should be something directed so that, of course, we can experience what we're looking for, but also help others along their path to spiritual evolvement. So it's very, very helpful if, before we actually get into the practice itself, we just spent a moment cultivating that compassionate energy, getting in touch with our own wish for happiness, peace, well-being, and then expanding the scope of our awareness to realize that all the other people in this room, in this building, on this block, in this city, in this country, have the same wishes. Recognizing how much we owe to them, the great kindness we've received, and then thinking, if my activities here this morning, and in fact if my life in general, is to have true meaning and purpose, then may what I'm doing here prove to be beneficial not merely for myself, but for all beings.